Hello everybody, my name is HibeltranSaysHi. You may not have heard from me in a while, or maybe you've heard from me recently. It just depends on when I decide to release this video. Anyways, I'm here to discuss my thoughts on Kingdom Hearts 3. Now, if you haven't played the game or got to finish it yet, I would advise you to come back to this video later as it will be chock full of spoilers. I'll be discussing my thoughts of everything I can think of, from the story to the gameplay, world selection, anything under the sun. Of course, I might forget a few things or overlook stuff a bit, or even change my mind about certain subjects as time goes on and the game has time to age a bit in my mind. As I'm writing this, I completed KH3 not too long ago, and I feel the need to get my thoughts out in the open on the subject. I'm writing my thoughts freely, so I'll try my best to keep things organized and in their own subjects, trying to avoid talking about gameplay, then story back to gameplay, then level design, etc. I'll try to have some structure. Also, don't be afraid to leave your thoughts or questions down below. I'm open to this being an open discussion amongst myself and other people, so feel free to join in on the comments below. Now, we got the video introduction out of the way, I'd like to start off with this. Kingdom Hearts is a series that has been there for most of my life, like most of its fans. I was introduced to it when I was a child and instantly fell in love. How could you not? You got to see Donald and Goofy interact with these weird anime characters. Some you've probably seen before, such as the Final Fantasy veterans, and some new characters nobody's heard of at the time. I vividly remember being a child and watching Disney Channel. In the early 2000s, they had advertisements for a game called Kingdom Hearts. I didn't know what it was, but it looked interesting. Me being a kid, however, granted me the problem of not really having my own money. Enough for a new video game, that is. But as a few months went on, me and my older brother had gone to Walmart to try and find a game to play. As a fan of Final Fantasy, he immediately gravitated towards this weird Disney/Final Fantasy crossover game. In his mind he thought, well, I like Final Fantasy, and my little brother obviously likes Disney still, so why not? So he buys the game and we went right home and popped it into the PS2. I didn't know I was in for a ride of a lifetime. The game greeted you with a very soothing piano song titled Dearly Beloved, and a simplistic menu with some beautiful artwork of the game's protagonist, Sora. I didn't have much thought, but after starting up the game and being hit with the addicting Simple and Clean, I was immediately hooked. The game was so fun to me, and I absolutely loved seeing my favorite Disney characters interacting with these new characters that I was growing an attachment to. I could give the whole story of my experience of all the games, but that's not the point of this video. I'm just giving my introduction to Kingdom Hearts 1 to show how much of an impact this game has on me and how in love with it I fell. And I fell hard. I managed to pick up every single game as they came out, from Chain of Memories to 2 and everything in between, all the way to 3. After a 17-year-long journey, this story arc of the Kingdom Hearts series was finally ending, and I gotta say, it was a bittersweet feeling. On one hand, I wanted to see how things finally turned out for all these characters: Terra, Ven, Aqua, Axel, Roxas, Xion, Sora, Riku, Kairi, Naminé, and more. But on the other, I knew this was going to be a turning point, the end of an era for me. The end of a story that I closely followed since I was about 7 or 8 years old. I didn't want it to end because then that would mean I would finally have to move on. Seemingly nothing to look forward to anymore. Now, I'm fully aware that the story will continue past 3. This is just the end of the Zane or Darkseeker saga. But it's the end of a saga I started with as a child. I never anticipated any form of media more than I anticipated this game. It felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. Just getting the package in the mail with the game in it was emotional for me, and that was nowhere near the beginning of the emotional roller coaster this game's experience had to offer me. I put the game in, downloaded it, cause you just can't pop a disc in and play anymore. It booted up, and after a few loading screens, I was introduced with something that hit me like a truck. The Kingdom Hearts 3 version of Dearly Beloved. It sounded fresh and new, but retained its nostalgic values, and I couldn't help but tear up quite a bit. Okay, I cried, so what? This isn't gonna be the last time I say I cried during this game, so get ready for that. After soaking up the music for quite a few minutes, I actually managed to select my difficulty and get the game started. This was it. The 13-year-long wait for Kingdom Hearts 3 was finally over. Yes, there were many games in between, and we never actually had a large gap between Kingdom Hearts games, but let's be real. When 358 Coded, Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance, and 0.2 all came out, people just wanted their damn Kingdom Hearts 3 already. I'm not going to call these side games because unfortunately these all contribute to the story quite a bit, so I'm just going to refer to Kingdom Hearts 1 through 3 as the numbered titles, basically the best ones of the crowd. That's not to say the unnumbered titles have no value, some of them are pretty good, but that's a can of worms I'll possibly get into at a different time. Also, keep in mind, whatever your opinions are on these games, whether you like or dislike them, or you have your own personal ranking of them, just remember that I'm basing this video around my own personal opinions. Just to avoid any butthurt from people who want to discuss why Kingdom Hearts sucks or discuss which ones are better, etc. My opinion isn't objective and frankly neither is yours. So, let's just get that out of the way. I figure I'd start off this review discussing the gameplay of Kingdom Hearts 3. Specifically the combat at first. It was advertised early on that the combat of this game would be a culmination of mostly all the games prior. It's got your basic commands that were utilized in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 with your attack, magic items, and some other options that vary per title. It's got shot locking that was introduced in Birth by Sleep. It's got these new things called situation commands which are supposed to take the place of reaction commands from Kingdom Hearts 2. They operate about the same though. We'll get into more detail on the difference. Links are introduced which are basically just summons. Grand Magic makes a return from 0.2. Now, to be fair, I'd say technically a form of Grand Magic was introduced in Birth by Sleep. By using a certain kind of magic and filling up your command gauge, you could perform a grander version of that spell. Specifically, the Grand Magic used in KH3 is ripped straight from 0.2 though. Building up the command gauge for special combat effects to happen has made a return from Birth by Sleep and 0.2. Having multiple shortcut pages has made a return from 0.2, Flow Motion makes a return from Dream Drop Distance, granted to a smaller and more nerfed extent, and I'm sure there's more stuff I'm missing, but for the sake of moving on, I'm just going to leave most of the returning stuff there. I'm just basing this off stuff from the top of my head. I've mentioned a couple previously, but KH3 does introduce a bunch of new things such as Attraction Flow, which is a new mechanic where you can hit an enemy with a green circle around it and be able to summon a theme park ride. Most, if not all of them, being rides inspired by Disneyland. Cooking is another thing introduced to the series where you can cook with Remy from Ratatouille to make dishes that give you stat boosts. This game also introduces the ability to upgrade your Keyblades, and if you want to get specific, you could say that was introduced in Unchained or Union Cross or whatever they're calling it now, but I'd say as far as console Kingdom Hearts games, this one is the one that introduces it. Another new thing that it brings to the table is the ability to swap between 3 Keyblades during battle, which has been a warm welcome to the series, and it offers numerous possibilities for combat. Now you might be thinking, shoot, with all these possibilities, how does the game stop you from being an overpowered god? Short answer is, it doesn't really. This game is the most powerful I've ever felt in a Kingdom Hearts game, and it's proven to be a bit of a problem a lot of the time. Having all these abilities is nice and all, but the game suffers a bit because of it. It's much too easy for its own good. It offers you too many options that I felt like to die I had to try or just stand there and do nothing for a couple minutes. I could probably count the amount of times I had to hear that infamous critical health beep on one hand. I know people joke about Donald's healing a lot, but I don't remember him healing me in this game very often. Not because he was busy neglecting me, but because I rarely ever needed it. I'm sure he felt super useless the whole time. On top of all that, this game offers you a new item called a Moogle Coin. This item allows you to only keep one in your inventory at a time, but it basically brings you back to full health one time if you die. I bought one as soon as I had access to a Moogle throughout my entire approximately 30-hour adventure. I never used it once. I guess to get a decent challenge you have to attempt a level 1 Proud Run, especially since the game doesn't offer critical mode at the recording of this review. Maybe it'll come out as free DLC down the line, but it just seems a tad disappointing to me. Mainly because you could play KH2 on standard mode and still get your ass handed to you by a bunch of fights such as Zaldin, Roxas, or Xigbar to name a few, provided you didn't already know exactly what to do. The game's been out for a while, so I understand why people typically don't feel threatened by these fights anymore, but I'm talking from a first-time perspective. There was rarely ever a time in my first KH3 playthrough where I felt threatened. I didn't know how to properly handle the fights, but it never mattered. There would always be something popping up to allow me a significantly easier win. It felt like the game was watching me and saying, "Having a rough time there, bud? Here you go, this magic button will allow you to wipe the floor with them." Kinda like how in more recent Super Mario Bros. Games they allow you an infinite power leaf to complete levels if you die too often. Okay, maybe it's not bad to that extent, but it still feels like I'm being babied. The ease of combat aside, I do think most of the stuff they added were fun and creative, and if maybe tweaked a little bit, they could be great. I think what most people wanted was a Kingdom Hearts 2 Part 2 as far as the combat goes, and the game definitely takes a lot of inspiration from KH2's combat, such as its extensive combo modifiers, but it completely does its own thing for the most part. Whether that's a positive or negative depends on your opinion on KH2. I just bring it up because 2 is the more popular one of the franchise and it's praised for its really tight and satisfying combat. Now, to go back to the topic of situation commands, they were advertised early on as a replacement for what KH2 coined as reaction commands, which are just known as QuickTime events in regular gaming terminology. I'm not too sure how much of a replacement they ended up being though, as they seem to do about the same thing. I think they wanted to combat the onslaught of them you received in 2 by making them more optional, but also make them less overpowered by offering you less invincibility frames or iframes. I feel by combating the complaints they got about 2's reaction commands and limits, since these seem to be the equivalent of both, they made even more broken reaction commands for 3. You take damage during your events due to limiting the iframes, but it's so minimal, what was even the point? That aside, why even allow us to take damage during something like that? You can't really control yourself for a lot of these situations, so the risk factor of it is just absurd if they made the damage you received significant. I guess if the damage really affected you that much, it would make you reevaluate the situation and decide if doing the situation command is worth it or not. Deciding if maybe you should play it safe for now until you have a proper opening to do such a risky but rewarding attack. The cost of these attacks is nothing too. At least in 2, if you wanted to perform a limit, you had to sacrifice all your magic and force it into recharge mode, whereas in 3, these commands just pop up randomly and you can use them with no consequence. You just gotta make sure to activate it before the overly generous 20 to 30 second timer is up. The cost for summons seems to be a downgrade from KH2 as well. With 2 it relied on your drive gauge, which was a separate thing from magic and something that took more time to refill. But in 3 you just need to have a full magic bar in order to do a summon, or what the game calls a link. That kind of cost is too easy to make up for, and it allowed me to spam summons almost freely. All you have to do is summon something, do your attacks, then avoid whatever you're fighting until your magic is recharged or use an ether, then come back full force with another summon. Rinse and repeat until you win. Now, to be fair, you could essentially do that with limits in KH2 since the limits relied on just taking up the rest of your magic bar. The drive gauge in 2 wasn't something you could just wait to recharge or use an item on the battlefield. You needed an ability that required you to be active for it to recharge, say, during a boss. You needed to be consistently fighting for it to go up. It didn't reward you for sitting around and waiting. That's what the limits in KH2 are for, which are admittedly broken as hell. I'm not going into this claiming the other Kingdom Hearts games didn't have broken mechanics. It just seems from 2 to 3 they went backward with how the summons/links could be used, and their version of limits could definitely be tweaked a bit. On the bright side, nothing was as broken as the seemingly infinite magic you could have had in KH1. I'm sure we can all agree on that. I'm not asking for 3 to be as hard as nails, but there's nothing wrong with a bit of challenge, and it feels like they tried their best to remove as much challenge from the game as reasonably possible without making you straight up invincible. Now, to briefly bring up the floaty debate that everyone loves to bring up in regards to this game, I'd say in my experience, at first I wasn't used to it due to playing KH1 and 2 so damn much, but I got used to it pretty quick. After a few minutes, I no longer felt as floaty as people were making out to be, and I felt some weight to my hits. I think the way the combat is built works for how the game is, all the way from its level design to how the enemies move around. Enemies tend to fly around a lot, and I would absolutely hate to constantly have the gravity pulling me down just by making one wrong step or the enemy going a little too high. One of the big concerns was being vulnerable in the air, and to bring back the topic of difficulty, I rarely ever felt a sense of urgency from being airbound. Maybe on a harder run I would, but during my playthrough I hardly felt cheap-shotted when I was in the air, and this game does allow you to do more things while you're airbound that you couldn't in other Kingdom Hearts games, such as using items and guarding while you're still floating. Overall, I think the game has the potential to be really great in its combat if it just tweaked a couple things. Maybe naturally bumped the challenge up a bit regardless of your difficulty mode. Don't make players have to fish for a little bit of challenge. It introduces some good ideas that need some fixing and brings back some older ideas and makes them better than ever, such as shot locking or the limitation of flow motion, which is a mechanic that you could definitely abuse the hell out of in Dream Drop Distance. Now that I have my thoughts about the combat out of the way, I wanted to talk about the world designs. I feel like after KH1, Square just didn't really focus too much on the layout of the worlds anymore. In Chain of Memories, they were literally randomized rooms that were all the same. The only difference is that the worlds had reskins to differ from other worlds. There was no exploration in that game, both in the Game Boy Advance and PS2 version. They're essentially the same game. It was disappointing. In Kingdom Hearts 2, you were either walking down a hallway half the time, or most areas were just glorified battle arenas. Birth by Sleep was about the same as 2, just a tad bigger. Dream Drop introduced the concept of these larger worlds with less loading zones, but I feel it suffered tremendously from being completely empty and not offering you anything after you traverse your way for story purpose. Maybe go back and pick up a chest or two, but other than that, you have no reason to look around. I feel like they knew the worlds in Dream Drop were big and empty, so that's partly why they implemented the infinite movement abilities with flow motion, just so you can get through a room a lot quicker. Feels like they didn't want you to naturally run and realize how much of a barren wasteland most of this game's rooms are. I think you'll find throughout this rough interview that I'm not a big fan of Dream Drop distance in the slightest. Now, I'm going into this fully aware that it's not very popular opinion and most people, if not all, will disagree with me, but the point of this video isn't to stroke everyone's opinions and make sure we're all on the same page. But I think of all the KH games before 3, KH1 had the best level design. Yes, get the crucifix, torches, and pitchforks ready and all that. Joking aside, it's not perfect design, but I feel 1's worlds were livelier than any of its sequels or prequels. It had some dimension to it that was immediately removed from any game in this series released after. I was a fan of the platforming. It made me feel like there was a lot more to do than just fight constantly. There were things I could be looking for, treasures and wonders I could work my way towards rather than just entering another battle arena that removes most, if not all, obstacles and focuses only on combat. KH1's level design of course has its flaws. The platforming wasn't perfect and was actually pretty clunky, which is why most people disliked it, but they could have developed it a bit more and polished it for future games rather than give up on it entirely. It had potential, and for what it was at the time, it could have been something awesome by the time KH2 rolled around. Now, maybe it's just nostalgia goggles, but acknowledging the flaws in the level design, nothing about it really turned me off from the game in the slightest, and it still doesn't. It also seems like KH1 tried more puzzles, which was also appreciated. They weren't always the best or most well thought out, but I had to put forth effort to get to my next destination that didn't revolve around combat constantly. I'm not complaining about having to fight stuff in an action RPG because, well, that's what you do in an action RPG. I'm just saying I enjoyed the variety and felt robbed when it was stripped away from future titles. Platforming and puzzles aside, the worlds, despite how small they were, had a lot of Easter eggs and neat little things you could do or find. Such as Traverse Town. You could go into the green room in the hotel and hit the clock above the door a few times and eventually it would spit out an item for you. Or all the neat little things you could do in Wonderland, which is a very fitting world to have neat little prizes that reward you for your exploration. Or how there was a chest in Hollow Bastion that wasn't found until almost a decade after the game's initial release in 2002. I don't remember the exact area, but it utilized a mechanic that not many people knew about, and it was using Blizzard to freeze the bubbles and turn them into platforms. Someone did that, then jumped up from the platform into an area that was not really seen before and found a chest waiting for them. There are plenty more examples to lay out, but I don't want to give away all the fun. Anyways, this was magical to me and still is. So much to do and explore. You were rewarded for just essentially screwing around. No matter how big or small a prize or Easter egg was, I felt a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction for getting to it. There are a few occasions future KH titles still offered that, but KH1 was chock full of them. I decidedly dragged on about my love for KH1's world design to transition into my love for KH3's world design, and boy do I love it. The worlds are so big and gorgeous and have so much to them I don't even know where to begin. I feel like this is the first Kingdom Hearts game in a long time that's been able to even come close to recapturing the magic that KH1's worlds had, to me at least. I'm gonna keep insisting that I'm aware that my love for KH1's worlds is an unpopular opinion. It just feels like KH3 took the magic I felt with KH1 world design and expanded it times 100. These worlds are so much fun to traverse, explore, and even just to stop and look for a minute and really take in the beauty. More or less, they essentially removed the brokenness of flow motion that they had in Dream Drop Distance, so this game offers you alternatives for exploration such as climbing walls, which I have to say is super fun. Now, I'm not saying they got rid of flow motion completely. A lot of its core mechanics are still prominent in the game, such as grinding on some rails, launching yourself off a wall, and spinning on certain objects. It's just not broken to the point of being able to reach any area regardless if you're supposed to or not, or cheesing your attacks by constantly bouncing off a wall to get a special flow motion attack out. In 3D, you could infinitely scale just about any obstacle that came your way, and to me that took away a lot of the fun the game could have had. But like stated before, I think they were self-aware the worlds in 3D were empty, so they wanted you to have the ability to just plow right through it. I think KH3 gives you a lot of incentive to explore these worlds, more so than previous titles. This game has a lot more collectibles for you to be concerned with, thus encouraging you to search high and low for what an area might have to offer. There are these new things called lucky emblems, which are Mickey-shaped icons hiding around worlds that you're supposed to take pictures of with your gummy phone. You get rewarded for collecting certain amounts, and I had fun collecting them all. Some of them are just painfully obvious, which is fine, and some are really tricky and hard to find. Of course, you also have treasure chests to hunt for, and this game has a lot of them. I've currently been doing my post-game stuff recently, and it's always super rewarding to scour an area that maybe you didn't really look too in depth before and finding some new treasure chests, emblems to take pictures of, or ingredients. Ingredients are a new thing introduced in this game. You explore worlds, find food lying around, and press triangle to collect it. Once you've collected a good amount, you're able to take the food to a place called the Bistro, which you can access via any save point or in Twilight Town. You're then able to cook with Remy to create a dish that gives you stat boosts, and that can always be helpful in certain situations. Or maybe not. I've spent a lot of my early part of this review describing how easy the game is, and I guess that only contributes to it. Oops. Ease of the game aside, I do enjoy the newly implemented cooking mechanic, not only for cool stat boosts, but mostly for giving me more incentive to explore the massive worlds this game has to offer me. And who could forget synthesis materials? Synthesizing has been absent from the Kingdom Hearts series after KH2, and for me, it was sorely missed. Synthesis doesn't really have much to do with level design, but it falls into the same category as those collectibles I mentioned. It incentivizes me to go out into the worlds, explore, and hunt certain things down to achieve a requirement I set for myself. If I'm hell-bent on synthesizing an item but don't have the proper materials, I know I'll have to go to a world to find a specific enemy that has a chance of dropping what I need. But in the process of getting to that, I could be coming across more chests, emblems, fighting more enemies that could drop synth materials for other things I might want later, etc. The big theme I keep repeating here is incentive. All these things add up to encouraging you, the player, to further explore the areas outside of what's required for story progression. It's up to you to decide if you want to do it or not, and I feel past KH games did incentivize exploration a bit, but not to the extent that 3 has. Now, to move on to the actual design of the levels themselves, I think they have been the most creative since KH1. It feels like they brought back a bit of platforming and polished it up quite a lot. They also designed the levels to not only be horizontal like most KH games prior, but they put a heavy focus on verticality as well, which is a warm welcome. With games like KH2 and Birth by Sleep, it felt like once I cleared an area once, that was it. If I got a couple chests, then there's nothing to be uncovered anymore, but with KH3, I keep finding myself coming back to areas and uncovering new spots for treasure and other rewards. It's a satisfying feeling that's been absent for so long. Rewards aside, even just coming across a new area you haven't seen yet is satisfying. The world selection isn't my favorite, but just the layout of the worlds themselves is definitely my favorite in the series. If we could go back and remake all the games to have worlds built like this, then we'd have a good time on our hands. So I look forward to future installments that have these world designs and possibly even improve on it, which is more than likely. As far as gameplay itself, I probably won't have as much to say about the other aspects as I did with the combat, so forgive me if I seem to run short on things to say about every detail I bring up. To boil down the level design though, it's my favorite design of levels in the whole series, and I look forward to exploring more worlds as future games are released. These levels are big, fleshed out, don't feel so barren and empty to me, and look completely amazing. Kingdom Hearts was destined for these kind of visuals. The teams worked really well for what they had in the PS2 era, but in modern times, the sky's the limit for what they can do. We can have worlds that are probably even bigger and filled to the brim with more content. KH3 is the liveliest any of the worlds ever felt in a KH game, and I feel like we can only go up from here. Now, after I praise the worlds for their designs and all that, I gotta say that Kingdom Hearts 3 doesn't really offer me my most exciting list of worlds of all the games. They just happen to be built really well. Now, if you're still trying to avoid spoilers but you haven't left yet, I would recommend leaving now because I'm going to be basically saying all the worlds and my kind of thoughts on them. I just mainly want to discuss how they turned out, and I want to keep it a little brief to move on to the next topic. Olympus was an excellent first world. It had 3 big areas that offered a lot of variety, and I never felt bored with my surroundings. Its only downside is that it doesn't contain Colosseum fights, which has been a Kingdom Hearts tradition for numbered titles, so maybe they get added in a future update, who knows. Twilight Town was okay. It's actually a lot smaller than it was in KH2. Most of the areas you could explore in that game, such as the Sandlot, Station Heights, and the Old Mansion, are all blocked off, and you're only limited to the Tram Common and the forest area. Toy Box is cool at first and it is big, but you're only limited to 2 areas essentially. Andy's room / neighborhood area and the toy store. At first I didn't feel bothered by it because I felt the toy store offered some good change in scenery with the different shops, but after spending a couple hours in that world it gets tiring real quick. I would have appreciated at least one more big area like Sid's house or Pizza Planet. Tangled was not very enjoyable to me. It's a generic forest setting for about 90% of the world, and then you finally make your way to the Kingdom area, which is probably the most exciting part of the world. You're not there for long before the game makes you go back to Rapunzel's tower to fight the final boss. Monsters Inc. was mildly interesting. I'd say it's the most linear of the worlds, but I thought it was fun romping around through it while doing story stuff. Nice variety in areas. Frozen was the world I was most surprised with. I found it enjoyable. It was probably the one world I resented for being included in the game, but it wasn't bad. The whole world takes place in a snowy mountain, but I felt like it contained a lot more excitement and fun to it than the Tangled world did with its boring forest setting. The only thing that bums me out is that we can't go to the small town at the bottom of the mountain. San Francisco was super interesting. It was a trip seeing Sora and the gang roaming around a modern city-like space, and it was really fun running up buildings, teleporting to the floating fish things, and fighting a boss on the damn Golden Gate Bridge of all places. There's a lot to explore in this world and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The Caribbean was the best experience I could have hoped for. It was the world I was most excited for and it just so happened to deliver the most. It had so much adventure and variety to it I felt like a damn pirate. You can swim around underwater, sail your ship and partake in naval battles, dock at random islands and explore what treasures or enemies await, and even explore most, if not all, of the town of Port Royal. It was an awesome world. 100 Acre Wood sucked. It was the most disappointing experience. KH3 did to Winnie the Pooh what KH2 did to Little Mermaid. Pooh's world is now limited to only one area, Rabbit's house, and all you do is 3 stupid mini-games that are all the same, just reskinned and you're done. That's literally it. Nothing in this game disappointed me more than that. As someone who actually enjoyed this world in KH1 and KH2, this was a huge letdown.
Is a country bear's world too much to fucking ask?
All that said, other than 100 Acre Wood, no world in this game really left me miserable. I had a fun time throughout and I look forward to many replays. The same thing can't be said for worlds in other games like Atlantica and KH1. I can't stand that world in the slightest. There's no amount of fun in being in that world to me. Or Pride Lands in KH2. I enjoy the concept, but they managed to make that world one I don't look forward to during my replays. Having most of the skills you've earned throughout your adventure be ripped away for the whole world puts a little bit of a damper on my mood if you feel me. Ah, the dreaded gummy missions. A typical Kingdom Hearts player's least favorite thing about the games. They've always managed to make these forced auto-scrolling wannabe Star Fox levels the least interesting thing in any of these games, and rightfully so. They're just a pain in the ass to get through sometimes. Not that they're hard, they're just not fun, and having to sit through a mission every time you want to get to a new world really bogs down the momentum. Especially on the off chance that you do die and have to redo the missions. I appreciated Birth by Sleep just skipping any sort of world traversing minigame altogether. Then Dream Drop tried doing its own thing, which is okay, I guess. I kinda like the gummy stuff more than the dropping though. There was no way gummy stuff could be fun. Then Kingdom Hearts 3 came around and said, hold my beer. After all these years, they finally managed to make gummy segments quite enjoyable. Almost to a point of looking forward to it, to me at least. They completely got rid of the guide rails you were constantly stuck to in previous games and allowed you the luxury of roaming freely. Free to go around and pick your fights should you choose to fight, free to go hunt for treasure, collect money, or shoot asteroids for gummy pieces and other materials that are useful outside of gummy stuff. This is it. They did it. After 17 long years, they finally made the damn gummy ship a fun aspect in a Kingdom Hearts game. I can't tell you how many bets I probably lost. This is the part where you wake up from this obvious dream. All jokes aside, I don't have a lot of detail review on the gummy segments other than it's legitimately a fun experience and I never found myself dreading it in this game. It felt like space exploration, and it was a warm welcome to the franchise, and I look forward to them hopefully keeping this trend for future titles in the series.
Well, here's what we all been waiting for. The story. I'd like to minimize this category as much as possible due to how long it could potentially be, so I'm gonna go into this assuming anyone watching is already up to date with their Kingdom Hearts lore. Especially since everyone and their mother are desperate for views these days. I'm not going to contribute to the YouTube cesspool of pumping out yet another Kingdom Hearts story summary for those easy YouTube bucks just because KH3 is a hot topic right now. Seriously, stop, this is getting out of hand. More than half of these videos are made by people who didn't care about the series until recently. Now that I got some of that salt out of the way, let's talk about the story. This is the culmination of everything from Kingdom Hearts 1 onward. KH1 began this story called the Xehanort Saga or Darkseeker Saga, and KH3 ends it off. This has been a long-running chapter in the KH books, and contrary to popular opinion, is not the last chapter of the Kingdom Hearts series, just of this story arc. Sora starts off the game powerless from the events of 3D and makes an attempt at regaining the strength he once had, but also learn the power of awakening in order to save literally everybody. The Wayfinder trio, Roxas trio, some organization members, like literally everybody. To no surprise really, he manages to do that by the end of the game, but what I think a big glaring problem throughout the whole game was the pacing. As you go through all the Disney worlds, you get minimal plot progression. Everything is shoved all the way to the final world. I'm not even kidding. There's little things here and there set up as you go on your adventure, but like, the 85% of story that still remains is pushed to the final world, the Keyblade Graveyard. I personally think this hurts the game's narrative a bit. I thought KH2 had some good pacing that felt fleshed out, and after every world or two I got a satisfying progression in story. It also helped that KH2 had you go in for second visits to the world, which allowed more opportunity for things. Maybe one visit I could fulfill the game's overarching narrative, then on another visit I'm dealing with the world's own personal troubles, like its own villain and whatnot. Like Scar, Oogie Boogie, Jafar, and more. KH3 never really had that. Hardly, at least. More often than not, you were fighting some heartless creation that an organization member threw at you, and even after that, it never felt like the organization members had much of a purpose in being in the worlds they were thrown in other than being a minor inconvenience. It made things feel a bit lifeless, which is a huge bummer because as far as gameplay went, the game was anything but lifeless. But when you pay attention to how the story and everything is structured, yeah, things start to feel either short, rushed, cut, or pointless. I think the game would have really benefited by being a bit longer and making you go through the worlds for a second visit, so the overarching story can be fleshed a bit more and so could the worlds. Once again, if you haven't left yet but still have not completed the game, I would advise you to return to this video once you've experienced the story yourself, so this is your final story spoiler warning.
Got it memorized?
Just about everybody in this game gets a happy ending, and it was really emotional for me. To see Terra, Ven, and Aqua all reunite after over a decade of suffering their tragic fates was satisfying. Seeing Roxas and Xion both become their own beings so they can reunite with Axel was heartwarming. Riku not dying was awesome because I, along with many other fans, were speculating that he would make some heroic sacrifice this time, but our boy is safe and sound, for now. They even managed to give Xemnas, Ansem Seeker of Darkness, and Xehanort a sympathetic and positive send-off, which I thought was cool, but when I sit and think about it, it feels weird sometimes.
My first surge of emotion in years, for as long as I can remember. And it's loneliness. Do you see? A heart is just pain.
Pain is being human, Xemnas.
Really? It must take incredible strength.
Your strength is vaster than darkness. I knew I never stood a chance. Part of me wanted to defy my fate, but when the others betrayed us, I found I did not care. And then, nothing else seemed to matter anymore.
Ansem.
What? It is time to move on, boy. There is more to seek. So go forth now and seek it.
Very well done.
Here. Ready, my friend?
Yes.
Xemnas and Ansem both had their own monologues before they met their demise, but Xehanort ends off by basically being sent off into the afterlife with his old best friend, Master Ericus. That was cool and all, but thinking back at all the lives that dude's ruined and the destruction he wrought upon numerous worlds, even murdering Ericus at one point, made me question if this ending was something he deserved. There's definitely a line of how much a piece of shit you can be before you absolutely cannot be redeemed, and I feel like Xehanort was well past that line. It wasn't until KH3 that they really wanted to flesh out him and Ericus' friendship when they were young, which felt too little too late after he kills him without a second thought in Birth by Sleep. It's presented in earlier games that they had history together, but being best friends like that wasn't something shown until recently. I guess I'm glad that someone as evil as him could be redeemed, but I wouldn't say it was the most satisfying send-off since a lot of it feels forced. It does get me excited for the next villain though. If someone as evil as Xehanort is deserving of an ending like that, then the next villain, probably Master of Masters, could be proven to be a lot darker and crueler. Who knows, really?
Yes! Demix time!
One bummer the story gave me was how useless Kairi felt this time around. Typically, people like to point out how useless she is, but it seemed like they were building her up to be a valuable helping hand this time, but no. She was hardly in the game, and when she was most prominent in the end, she was just a damsel in distress yet again, and offed by Xehanort. Which is another thing that bothered me. After Xehanort was defeated and Ericus took them both to heaven or some shit, nobody really seemed to care about Kairi still being gone in that moment. Sora didn't seem concerned with asking Xehanort about Kairi or anything. He just silently let Ericus and Xehanort have their moment before they disappeared. Granted, yes, afterwards Sora makes it a point to go on a rescue mission, but it just seemed odd that he didn't care at an earlier time. Oh, and Sora's dead now apparently, so that's interesting. He rescues Kairi, but before the credits you see them both sitting on a tree together holding hands before he fades away. So, like I said, most people had a satisfying ending. Now, onto the epilogue and secret movie. The epilogue reveals some spicy information that lets us know one of the better organization members is going to be sticking around for a while, and that Pete and Maleficent are being built up to be a threat in a future game again after they seem so underused and absolutely useless in this game.
Finally, back where it belongs. Is that you, Lucio? You look different. Haven't heard that name in a long while.
It's revealed that organization member Xigbar is actually Lucio, who is a character from Kingdom Hearts Unchained. Lucio is an apprentice of Master of Masters, and he is tasked with protecting the special black box, the one that Maleficent and Pete spend the whole game looking for in like 4 cutscenes. He is also tasked with passing the no-name Keyblade down so that way the Master of Masters can see the future with his eye, which is embedded onto the Keyblade. That same eye is embedded on multiple other Keyblades, but I don't want to get into that rabbit hole. Now that Xehanort isn't around, No Name is back in Lucio's possession and he summons the Foretellers to the Keyblade graveyard to explain his role to them. We then get to see Maleficent and Pete looking right at the black box they've had their hearts set on this whole game, so some good stuff is probably going to come of that. What Lucio or the Foretellers' plans are now, I have no idea, but I'm sure Nomura will find some crazy thing to do with them. If you met a specific requirement for Lucky Emblems, you may or may not have unlocked the secret movie titled Yozora. Yozora is a character that was shown off in the Toy Box world as like a fake advertisement for an almost Final Fantasy game called Virum Rex. The secret movie finds Sora waking up in Shibuya, specifically the Shibuya from the game The World Ends With You. and finds Riku seemingly waking up in Yazora's world. We don't really know too much information on what Riku is up to, probably trying to rescue Sora, but from what I hear, since I never played the game, I'm just familiar with concepts of it from Dream Drop Distance, Sora is in Shibuya to most likely participate in the Reaper's game to reclaim his life. The World Ends With You revolves around that whole concept. Neku, a character that Sora has met before, wakes up in Shibuya and is thrown into this game to try and survive. So it's safe to assume Sora's gonna have to do the same thing. I doubt it's gonna be a concept of an entire KH game, but I think they just wanted to show that they want to expand their world selections a bit outside of Disney and original stuff for the next game. This opens up a whole realm of possibilities for future titles, having a nice blend of some Disney worlds, original worlds, and worlds from other Square Enix properties. Maybe a Shrek world or something, who knows. And to end off the story segment, this secret movie ends off with a cloaked figure. We've never seen that before. This cloaked figure's on top of a building looking out to a moon and making a heart shaped with his fingers. This cloaked figure is more than likely the Master of Masters. What his intentions or plans are, nobody knows, but hopefully it'll be cool. We'll just have to wait for the next game to see how this all unfolds.
Well, that was super long, but those are my rough thoughts on Kingdom Hearts 3. Overall, it's a very enjoyable game. I think the long wait paid off for the most part. The thing I look forward to most is seeing how they improve upon the imperfections that KH3 had in the future titles, whether it be story, mechanics, levels, etc. I also have my fingers crossed that the next game, introducing a whole new story, will be Kingdom Hearts 4, not 1,000 side games leading up to Kingdom Hearts 4, because, well, I mean, that'd be kind of bullshit for Kingdom Hearts 3 to end a saga, and then people play Kingdom Hearts 4, and it's like, wait, why is this the end of a different one? What the hell is going on? I don't know, but we'll see what the future has in store for us. If you sat around for the entirety of this lengthy video, then hopefully you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun writing and recording it, especially after being out of the YouTube game for so long. This is the obligatory moment where the YouTuber who hasn't uploaded in a long time loses a bunch of subscribers because people forgot he existed. Number tank incoming. But I think I'll still be able to beat T-Series regardless. If you liked the video and want more, be sure to subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot and gives me an illusion of validation from a virtual number of people that I don't know. Until next time. Jesus Christ, look at this shit. I almost hit 10,000 words. I just have to try harder next time. Alright, new goal. 15,000 words, and it's just gonna be a video of me playing PUBG and constantly saying, what a fucking